Good morning and welcome to STL Startup Week. My name is Honora Harris and I'm a corporate attorney with Husch Blackwell. Husch Blackwell is a full-service national law firm with more than 1,000 attorneys located across the United States at our more than 20 brick-and-mortar locations and our virtual office, The Link. We offer more than just legal advice. We offer custom-tailored strategies across all stages of the startup lifecycle, from formation to transition, including financing, intellectual property, labor and employment, mergers, contracts, real estate, and more. Husch Blackwell has been a footprint in the St. Louis community for close to 100 years. We have been a longtime supporter of the local entrepreneurial community here in St. Louis and a proud sponsor of STL Startup Week. I wanted to take some time to briefly introduce our keynote speaker this morning, Kasey Grelle, CEO of Ox Insights. Kasey has been a part of the fabric of the entrepreneurial community for more than a decade, but only recently took the plunge herself. She started Ox Insights just shy of her 39th birthday. Ox is a consulting firm that works with some of the biggest private equity firms in the world, assisting with due diligence and helping to grow their portfolio companies in the digital age. Please give a warm welcome to Kasey Grelle and the lead organizer for STL Startup Week, Matt Minetti.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Honora. Thanks to Husch Blackwell for sponsoring this fireside chat. We don't have a fireside, we don't have a fireplace, but maybe eventually we'll put that up. Thank you so much for being here, Kasey. You and I know each other from the entrepreneurship ecosystem. Prosper, 630, a number of different accelerators and kind of come and gone, but give our audience kind of a sense of your entrepreneurship background. Like, how did you arrive at Ox Insights? What's your origin story?
Yeah, so I'm from Nebraska originally, from Omaha, came to St. Louis originally for WashU. I actually started my career as a journalist, so I started my career in TV news. So I worked during college for MSNBC and then got a job in Australia working in TV news. And then when I graduated, I moved to Missoula, Montana, and then back to St. Louis and worked for KSDK for a few years. And I think I had this moment standing on an overpass actually right outside Edward Jones at 4 in the morning telling people that it was snowing and that they should drive slowly and wear a coat. And I remember calling my husband and being like, this can't be my life. I can't do this anymore. And so I decided to go to business school because I didn't know what else to do. And I went to WashU and it was a really, really great experience. I still didn't know what to do. And so I just started talking to people and trying to figure out what I wanted to do, what I didn't want to do. And what I quickly found out was that I don't think I was made for a big corporate. I just am not good at following rules. And so that kind of stressed me out a little bit. And the more I talked to people, the more I was gravitating towards this concept of entrepreneurship. But I didn't really have an idea of what I wanted to do. Yeah. And so I started the MBA program. Actually, Cliff Holcamp was in one of his first years of running the entrepreneurship program, and Cultivation Capital was literally in its infancy. And so I took an opportunity to start working on diligence for them, and I loved it. And it felt a lot like the journalistic stuff that I had been doing as a reporter, like digging into companies, finding the problems, the opportunities. And so I kind of worked my way up through Cultivation, became their director of investor relations, and then eventually, we started or I helped you start the 630 Accelerator, and then I started the Prosper Startup Accelerator with an amazing group of women. And so the ideas were there, and I was kind of in the fabric of it, but I didn't feel like I ever had an idea that I could fully run with. And so I ended up leaving Cultivation after a few years running their tech fund investments and went to what was then a spin-off of Answers.com to do a lot of their mergers and acquisitions. So that was my job. I got there, realized the company was kind of a disaster, and it needed a lot more than mergers and acquisitions. It needed a strategy, a full kind of reboot. I ended up taking over as eventually COO and then CEO. They were in tons of debt, having to pay off $40 million in debt, rebuild the business model, and then sold it to another private equity firm. So all that to say, I knew a lot of the pieces of entrepreneurship, but still didn't have an idea. So when I sold the business, when I sold Quillt, I was kind of freaking out because I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I didn't feel like I didn't have any qualifications to do anything in St. Louis. And so I started talking about starting this idea of just being a consultant. And I ran into a friend of mine, Jesse Puggi, Jesse is a serial entrepreneur. He found that, I was looking for my next thing. He's like, great, I have 18 ideas I want to start. Let's start riffing on them. And I was like, Jesse, there's no way. I don't want to be an entrepreneur. I have 3 little kids. I'm stressed. That sounds too much. But what are they? Mm-hmm. And so we started exploring some of them, and we didn't end up, Ox wasn't one of those ideas, mm-hmm. but there was enough of a seedling there. So we can talk about how that grew, but like that was like, we found a need and a niche, like tapping into some of the things that I was uniquely qualified to do, mm-hmm. and Jesse was uniquely qualified to do, and it really opened the door to Ox. And I think a lot of the lessons that I observed being part of the fabric of this community for years, from the outside, not as a founder, like came back to serve me mm-hmm. once I took the role as founder.
Nice. How did you go about sort of kicking the tires on some of those ideas that you talked to Jesse about in terms of like prioritizing ones that you wanted to pursue or ones that maybe didn't have a strong enough opportunity or business model? Like, how did you go about sort of testing those either individually or together?
Yeah, so we started off building an idea that was completely different. And I kind of felt this like in my heart, like, I can build this, I guess. This is fine. This is an okay idea. But it didn't feel like, man, this is it. But it was better than anything else I had going. And so we were working on it, we were vetting it. And then he mentioned casually in a conversation, he's like, when I was at Ampush, his old company, we used to do diligence on the side for KKR, one of the biggest private equity firms in the world. I was like, wait, what? That's a thing? Like, that's our business. That's what I love to do. That's our experience. Like, that's our business. And so that like one side conversation started the gem for, where we ended up building from. And I think one of the biggest lessons I learned was that we actually started to build demand before we started. And so we went out, before we even built Ox, we had conversations with probably 50 people in private equity from either my network or Jesse's to say, hey, we have this idea. Is this a problem you have? Who's solving it for you right now? How do you get comfortable with it? And almost every single private equity firm we talked to said, yes, this is a huge problem, but we don't have anyone to solve it. We don't get it. If you build it, we'll use it. Mm-hmm. And so that was really reassuring and kind of took some of that scariness out mm-hmm. of it. And it felt right. And so that's how we started building Ox. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about just sort of your relationship with Jesse around entrepreneurs that may be here, or future entrepreneurs, around this idea of, imposter syndrome and thinking about what they can do individually by themselves versus maybe seeking out a co-founder, someone that might complement them? Like, how did that relationship sort of develop over time where you could really trust each other?
Yeah, it's funny because Jesse and I met first through the company I was running, Quillt, and we hired them to work with some of our websites. And actually, the relationship didn't go well. They didn't do what we needed them to. We ended up kind of fighting over the contract at the end, but we left on decent terms. But I just thought that was kind of the end of it. But then in 2019, Jesse moved back to town, and he reached out of the blue because I was one of a handful of people he knew professionally in St. Louis, and we just started reconnecting. And I'm glad that even in a situation where I wasn't happy with the outcome of how we worked together professionally, we left on really good terms mm-hmm. because that left the door open to where we could kind of start building this. But I think what was helpful for me, I mentioned I struggled with finding the idea of what I wanted to start. I knew I wanted to do something, but I didn't have the perfect idea, mm-hmm. and that was a blocker for me. Yeah. And so I think having someone else to riff with the ideas on, like to go back and forth, to whiteboard, like that was really, really helpful. Mm-hmm. And then this concept of Jesse introduced me to, like, finding your unfair advantages and leaning into those, that was huge because Jesse's background, he started his career at McKinsey, then Goldman, then he started his own digital marketing firm. And my background, I started in TV news, then was in, worked for Cultivation, structured deals, did diligence, and then did M&A, worked in a business that did digital marketing. So we had the deal structuring, the marketing. It felt like we knew that world really well, and we knew how to translate marketing to investors, into people in the finance world. And so that felt like something that was unique and something that we should lean into. And as we started to kind of dig into it further, it was unique. And so that was an unfair advantage that the two of us really could speak to better than anyone else. And so I think for me, especially where I was in my life at the time, having someone that I felt like I could bounce ideas off of was really helpful. Having someone that also brought a network to the table was really helpful. And, you know, having someone who brought, quote, that unfair advantage in a way that complemented my unfair advantages was really helpful.
Yeah. So you talked about unfair advantages in the context of maybe some of your skills or backgrounds, like what you're bringing to the table individually. Can you talk more kind of broadly about market opportunities and that kind of analysis for founders? Is that something they need to be, you know, thinking about out of the gate? Is it something that can be developed over the life cycle of their company? Like when you think about unfair advantages for sort of a business model, business plan, what did that look like for you, or what advice could you share with attendees on how they may go about that exercise?
Yeah, there's an exercise that we both did, kind of trying to find our zones of genius and trying to figure out, like, what are the things that when I'm doing, I'm like 10 out of 10, I'm firing on all cylinders, and I'm really just like giving it my all and loving it. And what are the things that like I hate? And I am not really good at the details. I'm really good at the ideas. I'm really good at selling. I'm really good at looking at diligence. I'm really good at digging in and finding the problems and figuring out how to fix them. That is my zone of genius and something that I'm really good at. And then I'm particularly really good at doing it within marketing. I don't know that I had the language of knowing what that was until, you know, I started working with a coach and working with Jesse and kind of going through some of those business frameworks. And so now when I talk to founders, I sit down and say, you know, what are the things that, like, when you do, you know you're nailing, you know that you're crushing and nobody is better at than you, or you feel like you're just, you know, 10 out of 10. And try and figure out how can you build a business that takes advantage of maximizing your 10 out of 10 time when you're really on fire. And then how can you find people to support the things that you're not so good at? So I'm not so good at building the HR systems or the processes or the, you know, SOPs. Like, I'm very bad at that. But I have someone in our organization who's very good at it. And so admitting the things that I'm not really great at doing and that don't really bring me joy and that don't bring the company to a better place, and then figuring out how to either do them differently, delegate them, or just deprioritize them.
Yeah. So you acquired a lot of these skills both on sort of the other side of the table with your venture experience, being able to, you know, run an existing company, but also with your MBA experience. Are there things that, looking back in terms of all the things that sort of got you to that point where you felt like you were at least ready enough to take the leap, for people that may be thinking, well, I don't have any of that experience, or they may not be sort of ready to take an MBA or to pay for an MBA? What kind of sort of on-the-job experience can people get to that point where they understand, you understand that industry so well to know, like, here are the business opportunities, here's potential landmines that that we can step on or the business can step on. Where do people get that experience? Yeah,
I mean, one thing about the MBA and one thing just about that feeling of confidence, that you have enough confidence to do this or to be an entrepreneur or to get that, you know, that foot up. I never felt like that. I didn't feel like that when I started this business. I felt like an imposter from the beginning, like, I don't know how to do this. And I think the best way that I learned and got that experience was by trying, failing, and then learning from my mistakes. Like, some of our first projects and some of the first things that I did at Aux, I was running the projects. And if I look back at that work that we did, I mean, it was good work. We grew the companies, but now I look back from there to now, and it's like kind of cringe. And I did a lot of things very wrong, and things that we learned from, and that made, but my confidence in knowing that I know the right thing to do for these businesses comes from making those mistakes. So if you're not going to get an MBA, if you're not going to, you know, have this amazing pedigree, fine. I don't think that matters. I think what matters is putting yourself out there and making mistakes and being okay with, like, what's the learning in these mistakes. Because even today, like, I know I'm going to go into work today and I'm going to make a mistake. But the question is like, how do you learn from that?
Yeah.
How do you grow from it? And so if you have that curiosity mindset of, I'm just going to throw it out here, try, test, iterate, figure out like what I can learn, like that is what I would tell you.
How do founders know what the right mistakes to make?
You don't. You have no idea. But I think, we've talked about calculated risks. Like how can you put fences around the risks that you're taking so that, the collateral damage of these risks isn't as great. We've been working with a company for a while. So we do a lot of marketing improvement for companies. And this company sold for $2 billion, but their marketing organization was a hot mess.
Yeah.
And it took them 32 days to get an email from the idea stage to approved and sent. 32 days, that's insane. Like just an email about a product. Because everybody else had to weigh in. And so we came in and we said, well, what's the worst thing that happens? If you send literally the worst email that you could possibly send, what's the worst thing that happens? You guys have a 2% open rate anyway. Nobody's gonna read it.
Yeah.
So I don't know, let's just test some stuff and see what happens.
Yeah.
And so I think once you get comfortable with how can you understand how much of a risk this is, are there ways to kind of fence it off? Then I think it gives me more comfort in taking those risks.
We'll get back to, I want to circle back up on risk too with both personal risk and business risk. Talk to us a little bit about, you come in day one with maybe a sense of what this company is going to be and what the challenges are going to be, and then sitting here today, what that landscape looks like, what changed, or is the company that you have now what you envisioned, starting out?
Yeah, yes and no. So just as kind of a primer. So we work with private equity firms to either diligence their businesses through the lens of digital marketing and digital revenue growth, or to grow them once they've bought them. So let's say you're gonna go and buy this water bottle company and you wanna understand how good are they at finding customers digitally. We'll come in and assess how good are they at doing this today? How good are they at converting them? Where are the opportunities to grow that digital revenue stream? And what would we do in our kind of position as an operator if we ran this business to grow its revenue? So we put that together for the private equity firm when they're looking to buy this business. And then on the flip side, once they've bought it, we come in, we actually put that growth plan to work. So we strategize, we figure out what do they need to do, who do they need to bring in from the people, process, tools, and external partners, and then we coach them on doing it. So that's what our business is. When I started the business, it was April of 2023, and everybody we talked to, all the private equity firms that we talked to said, oh man, we totally need this for diligence. We're structuring deals and we have no idea how to understand this concentration in paid search or how much we could grow this business digitally. We need it. And so I put together our projections for this year. And actually, like, the revenue projections are dead on, but the mix of diligence to value creation, completely off, because we started the business in the middle of a super tight debt market, so people weren't doing deals. And so we started off by doing a lot more value creation, and that's since kind of equaled out a bit, but I'm glad I was wrong, because diligence is a lot more intense and a lot more time crunched. And so value creation kind of gave us the chance to learn. But it was a totally different business than I thought we'd have today.
Yeah. So you've had some setbacks, you've had some challenges, but there's been some success. Can you speak to what you attribute to some of that success, either personally or professionally?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all comes down to people. So I guess if you're gonna start anything, like, the first things first is making sure that you have good people around you, and that starts at home. So for me, I'm lucky enough that I have a spouse and a partner who supports me unconditionally and shows up when I need to be somewhere else, and really supports and is the rock in our family. And I have 3 amazing kids who, who cheer me on from the sidelines. And then I've hired the best people that I've ever met. They're the smartest, most talented people that I've ever met. And so this idea of going into work is so fun because it feels like a challenge every day. And so I think if you're gonna start something, this is going to be your world and it's going to take a lot out of you. And so don't screw up by putting the wrong people around you at the table. I think that's one huge lesson. I think the other huge lesson, actually, one of the other co-founders of another business that Jesse helped to co-found, Adrienne, she started Growth Assistant. When I was starting this business and even like negotiating with the terms of my co-founder partnership with Jesse, like I had a gut feeling about something that I didn't quite like in the negotiation. And I was trying to talk to Adrienne about what her experience was in working with Jesse. And I was like, I don't know, I mean, this thing, like I'm not sure about it. And she's like, if you're not a whole body yes to this, like if you don't feel it all over, don't do it. Because you're gonna be in the trenches with this person, with your co-founder. And if you feel that now, it's only gonna get worse. And so you need to address it now. And I think that was really, really good advice. And it led me to have a very candid conversation about what I was feeling, some of the kind of past mistakes and experiences I had that had led me to why this point of the negotiation was so important. And he ended up understanding and meeting me where I was, which was great. But that idea, that concept of like, I know now, I've ignored this feeling so many times in my career. And now when I feel it, I don't, because the times that I've ignored it, I've regretted it.
Yeah, and that just comes from experience and learning. So about a month ago, you posted, and you've been more active on LinkedIn, just kind of sharing a little bit about your professional story, your personal story. Talk to us a little bit about company values. And so you talked, both explain, tell the audience what those values are, but then maybe more importantly, how did you arrive at those values? Like, how did you know these were the ones that you wanted to really guide the company forward?
Yeah. So I've always hated doing mission statements and company values because I feel like they're bullshit. Like everybody's is like the same version of, and they just felt hollow and they felt like, oh, what are yours? Okay, yeah, that sounds good, I'll take those. And so it never felt authentic. And so I hated the exercise, I hated doing the work, and so I've always kind of like pushed it off. And I work with a coach, and his framework, his leadership framework is this idea of conscious leadership. So it's trying to kind of understand about the things that bring you energy and the things that take away from you, and when you're above the line and having energy versus below the line, the things that drag you down. And so I described to him, like, I don't want to do this, I hate this. And he was like, well, let's just talk. Like, tell me about the people in your organization and who makes your organization tick and what is it about them? And what are the things that you love and that you want more of? And what are the things that, you wish you could have less of or change? And so where we landed with was this set of values that feels so authentic to us and to who we are as an organization that, I think it goes beyond the like no assholes value. Yes, we don't want assholes, but it's a different version of it where it's, we go out of our way to make sure that, we're helping each other and we're showing up for people in times. We support each other. We don't like takers. We want people who are giving, but we're also not trying to exploit each other. There's this focus on entrepreneurial rigor. So this test and iterate, this try stuff, this like don't be afraid to have a mistake. And so, I don't candidly have all of the values in front of me, but I know that when I look at someone, when I hire someone, I use those values to go through and say, tell me about a time when you made a mistake and you let your team down and how did you handle it? And if you come out guns blazing and blaming everybody else, thanks but no thanks, you're not our person. And so I think having a really good defined sense of what you stand for and what you don't really makes a huge difference because you're gonna have to trust these people.
How do you know when to start developing that?
That's a really good question. I don't think I would have been able to do it. So we just did this about 3 months ago. And I don't think I would have been able to do it before then. And I'm sure they'll be totally different in a year. And so I think you need to let the business breathe a little bit. Like, I don't think, how do we start? We did. We used Traction. And so they have you go through your mission and your values. And I mean, I went back and looked at our values, and it felt real cringe.
Yeah.
Like it was just like, this is not us. I mean, it just felt like cookie cutter. It wasn't us. And so now I look at our values, and I'm like, this is actually who we are. But I think it took a year of figuring it out, and I'm sure in 3 or 4 years when I look back, I don't think they'll be as cringy, but I think they will have evolved, and I think it is an evolving process.
Yeah, that seems healthy, right? When you think about the different stages of an organization in terms of maybe some of the values that you had as co-founders, and then you bring on the first 10 employees, and suddenly it's like, hey, we have to figure out like how we interact with the people that we employ and a leadership team and all that.
Yeah.
Kind of looping back a little bit to some of the things you brought up earlier. So you've dealt with some personal adversity during just your professional career, your life. Can you tell us a little bit about how that shaped you as a leader and as an entrepreneur?
Yeah. So I had, in 2016 and 2020 were kind of particularly not great years for me. So in 2016, my dad had pancreatic cancer, and he was 60 years old. He had been fighting it for a couple years, but he died on June 4th of 2016. I was 5 months pregnant with our second child. Unbeknownst to us, my mom also had cancer, and she died 2 weeks later of ovarian cancer. She was 61. So that happened in like rapid succession. And then, we started gutting our house, which was crazy, maybe, later that summer. So our house was under construction. I took over as CEO of Quillt that summer. So there was just a lot of chaos. We had a toddler. And then in November, about a month before the election, my husband was actually hit by a car as a pedestrian and broke dozens of bones in his body, and spent a month in the hospital, and then got out, and we had our daughter 3 days later. So that was a lot. And then, in 2020, fast forward, I ended up, we were restructuring the company from a debt perspective. I had the debt renegotiated, and then COVID hit, and that deal got thrown out. So then I had to run a process to sell the full company, or to sell part of the company to pay off our debt during COVID, knowing no one. Oh, by the way, I was 9 months pregnant. We had our third baby the day the hospital locked down with COVID. So it was the maternity leave that never happened, but also never ended.
Yeah.
And so it was, I look back at that time and I think like the soundbite, well, actually, my daughter's been listening to a lot of Taylor Swift lately. And so the line, like, I cry a lot, but I'm so productive, that keeps like playing in my mind. But the truth is, like, I didn't cry. I shoved all my emotions down and put them in a box, and I kept going, and I didn't feel, and I just pushed on, because I felt like, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And it, look, I'm here, I did it, but I think if I could go back to myself or to anybody else who's going through this crazy period of adversity or anything, what I would tell myself is, the flip side of like doing that and not feeling your feelings is that, I don't feel the lows as much, or didn't feel the lows as much, but I also don't feel the highs as high. And so I feel like I also missed out on a lot of the pieces in the journey, because I was just so blinders, like I have to keep going. There's so much beauty in the journey and in those like moments. I mean, I talked about my husband, 2016, he couldn't walk for 6 months and was living in a hospital bed in our living room. And I just kept going so much that I didn't fully appreciate all the work that he was doing to like get back to, he's a professional musician. He plays on at the pageant. He plays at Del Mar Hall, like plays these huge music venues. And if you met him, if you knew him, you'd have no idea today. And I think I took for granted some of those moments of like all of the work that he put in to like show up for us as a family, to show up for me as a partner, to support me in being able to do this. And I took it for granted. And I wish I would have had the presence of mind to like appreciate the struggle in those really hard times, because I feel like having that gratitude would have connected me more. And I've spent a lot of time in therapy and a lot of time trying to get back to that person with an open heart who can feel those things. And I guess my takeaway is, you will go through hard things. You will go through really, really awful things. And to shut yourself down and to not take a moment, even when it's really hard, to step back and like appreciate the struggle and appreciate the journey and the people who show up for you, even in your times of like darkest dark. Like, I wish I would have done that, and I wish I would have spent more time acknowledging the people who did that and showed up for me in those ways. And I think Anderson Cooper has this podcast on grief and loss. And he says, he's interviewing Stephen Colbert, and Stephen Colbert, if you don't know, he lost his dad and brother in a plane crash when he was very young. And Stephen Colbert says that he's grateful for his grief because it made him the person that he was today. And I feel that very deeply. I'm not grateful for what I went through, what we went through, but I'm so grateful that I have learned and grown and done it wrong and gone back and learned and opened my heart as a human, because it brought me to where I am today. And so I think you have to look at those deep periods of difficulty and loss and appreciate them for like the gifts in your life that they actually are.
We appreciate you being, vulnerable and sharing those things. I think a lot of these topics are really important for entrepreneurs and maybe glossed over when we think about sort of overnight successes and sort of the glamorization of entrepreneurship and business. For people who are maybe experiencing some of those lows, how do folks sort of understand when they need to tap out and say this is too much, right? When you think about the personal risk that the relationships that may be affected or harmed, when you think about the financial risk, they're putting everything on their credit card, or their savings are going to this crazy idea that they really believe in. How do people navigate how to know what's too much?
I think I don't have a perfect answer, because I think a lot of people describe me as too much, and so I think I get too much. I think in your heart of hearts, like, all I can tell you is go back to that. You have that feeling inside you that if you listen, you have that intuition inside of you. And like, I've done those things. I put a lot of money on credit cards. I didn't get paid for a while. Like, I've taken those risks. I have 3 kids, and I was 39 when I started this thing. And that was really scary. But I also believed in myself, and I believed in the people around me who were supporting me and helping me to do it. And so I think that gave me confidence. I think the other thing I will tell you is, one of the things that I didn't appreciate or expect about being an entrepreneur is it's so different than even being a hired gun running somebody else's company, because the emotional impact of it is so different. Like, the highs and lows, the ups and downs are so pronounced and so huge, and they happen every 20 seconds. And like, one minute I'm like, oh my God, this business is amazing. And the next minute I'm like, okay, we're gonna sell everything and we're gonna have to. and that happens on repeat like 28 times a day. And I really, really struggled with that in the first 6 months, year of the business, like that emotional roller coaster. And so I asked a lot of people about, like, man, what do I do about this? And I remember one guy told me, oh yeah, you just like don't feel those things. Just like shut it down, don't feel it. And I was like, wait, no, remember, this is exactly what you went through personally. Like, you can't shut it down, because then you won't feel the highs as high and they won't feel as good. And you want to go through that human experience. I think what I would say is try and figure out like what's true to you, and talk to other people. And I think that's where I got a lot of comfort. Yeah, I talked to that one guy and he said, shut it down. But I also talked to Kim Yawitz, is another female entrepreneur in town. She gave me this book called In the Company of Women, and it was all stories about female entrepreneurs and how they had been through like their journey as an entrepreneur. And it was like the best gift she could have given me. And she said, we've all been through it. You just have to figure out what's true to you and how to get through it in a way that feels authentic. And so I think if you're going through those lows, like, trust yourself, trust your gut, trust your intuition, And when it's time to say no to something, you have to trust your gut and know that it's time to say no. But as an entrepreneur, that's really hard.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like you had enough experiences where you either, you acknowledged it and said, hey, I'm going to sort of push everything down and, ignore it, versus at least acknowledging it and moving on. And I know I had someone kind of describe it to me as, you're running a race, and I think one of our committee members, who's training for a marathon here in February, there's going to be times when like your body's going to give you pain to say, hey, this is hard.
Yeah.
And I have, a foot, or my body is hurting, but at what point are you really risking injury to yourself and others versus, hey, I've been here, I've trained enough to know I can push through. And so it's kind of understanding when sort of things are teetering personally and professionally. When do you just say, I hear it, my body's saying it, and I can still understand that there's opportunity and the sort of trajectory upwards on the other end of the roller coaster. So I think that's a really good analogy. What has surprised you most about becoming an entrepreneur?
I mean, that the roller coaster for sure. Like, I was not expecting how much of an emotional toll it would have. I think, but the joys and like the satisfaction, and I go back to, what I was saying, the personal lessons that I had. Where this business is today versus where we were a year ago or where we started, I'm blown away. But I also sometimes forget to slow down and enjoy that journey and like enjoy the moments where I've really screwed up something, because what is that lesson? Like, I have to give myself a little bit of grace in those moments. But also when we have these big wins, I used to say, oh, we closed this huge deal, great, now I've got to close 5 more. And I think having the moment to just be like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
Like, think about what you're doing, think about what you're building, and really try and celebrate and appreciate those moments of the actual journey, because like there's so many little moments that I feel like I've missed because I felt like I had to keep going and push and push and push. And I want to get those back. And so even when times are down, when times are good, like, remember this, replay it, write it down, because I feel like those are the things that I am surprised by, and I also don't want to forget.
Yeah. So the theme for Startup Week this year is Venture Boldly. And we talked a little bit about risk and bravery and being able to develop your own sense of confidence. So for people who are just getting started out, or that maybe have an idea, like, how do they go about developing that sort of swagger or confidence, venturing boldly into something that maybe they don't know a lot about if they have never run a business? Like, how do they go about sort of building self-confidence?
Well, I think one thing that I've learned is that I've never been fully prepared to do anything that I've ever done. I feel like, man, if you could get a hold of some of my early news tapes from Missoula, Montana, it would be very ugly. Like, I put myself out there, and it was very, very, very bad. But I got better, and I learned, and I feel like the biggest thing that I would tell you is figure out how to put yourself out there and try something, and take micro risks and figure out, can you calculate like the impact of it. But you're never going to get that confidence unless you try it, learn from it, and then move on.
Yeah. One more question, and then we'll get to our Q&A. So we'll have Honora come back up and facilitate that. So kind of think about some questions you might have for Kasey in our last 10 minutes. Any last minute advice for founders just getting started? Things that you already touched on or maybe didn't get an opportunity to share?
Yeah, I think I can't go back enough to this feeling and trusting your gut and your intuition. And if you're not paying attention enough to that feeling, like, when something doesn't feel good. Like, there were definitely deals that we took early in this business that I knew, like, all the warning signals were going off, being like, man, this client is not our client. Like, there's so many, I was like trying to figure out workarounds and like, yeah, we can do that. And like, yeah, we'll just like figure that out. And all the warning bells were going off, and I just ignored them. And we took the deal, we did the work, and it was awful in terms of like every single day. I mean, we did it, we got to a good outcome, but every single day was a slog and it was so hard. And I think one of the things that is really hard, because one of my skill sets is selling, I'm really good at selling. And when the business is in trouble, I can sell. That is what I can do. Two things: learn to say no when it's not the right deal, because if you say yes to the ones that aren't the right deal, you will actually be hurting your business way worse. And that was really hard for me to learn. And I think taking the time, you know, over the summer, one thing I didn't know is like, I guess it's intuitive, but I didn't think about it. Private equity slows down. They all go on vacation over the summer. So deal flow slowed down for us. And you know, when I get nervous, when I'm scared, I go sell. And that was my gut instinct, was like, okay, I'm just going to sell my way out of it. But if I sold in that time, I would be selling into deals that weren't really good deals.
Sure.
And so what I did instead was, okay, I'm going to take a step back. I'm not going to sell. I'm going to fight against that urge to sell. And I'm going to focus on building the infrastructure so that when everybody comes back after Labor Day,
you're ready.
We're prepared.
Yeah.
And we did that. And that was really hard. But it was the right decision for the business. And so I think know when is right in your business to say no, and trust that instinct.
Yeah, great note. Nora?
All right, any questions?
This was real talk. Thank you so much. I'm a serial entrepreneur. And my question is, how are you able to make sure you get paid when you take on clients? I had a consultant opportunity and I proposed to provide services, and then the client, even though I thought this was the plan for her, just dumped everything out. It's like, do you make them follow the contract? How do you deal with a client like that?
Yeah, man, that is hard. And I think one of the things that's really hard for us too is that, you know, when we do a diligence, for example, we did a diligence in March, we don't get paid until the deal closes sometimes. So that's like, can be November. And as a small business, like that cash flow, like managing to that cash flow, I've already paid the people who did the work. And so now I'm just eating that you know, that cash flow. And so that's really hard. I think one thing that I learned was that good documents, making sure that I have, you know, it's worth spending the money on good lawyers and good documents, because that has gotten us out of some jams in the past. I think trying to figure out like what a win for all is. So we have a client right now who the part of the business we worked on is doing really well, but the bigger part of the business is failing, and they're going through layoffs, and so, you know, they still owe us a good chunk of money, but it feels, how do I balance, you know, you just laid off a good chunk of your workforce, but you owe us money. So trying to figure out a win for all. So can we structure a deal where you pay it off over time, or is there some certainty around how we get paid, and something that could work for you and understands your client where they are? That's what I've tried to do, but it is really, really hard. And I think we've also set up some, like finding a good banking partner where you can set up some financing where you can absorb those cash flow ups and downs. And so we've got a lender who allows us to borrow on our accounts receivable. And that's been really helpful, especially in the infancy of managing our startup and managing the cash flow up and down.
Thank you.
Yeah, good luck. It's not easy. Yeah.
Oh, we got one more, and then we'll come.
An entrepreneur who's just starting out.
So.
Yeah, I think my biggest advice that I would say is like, for years, you know, from when I met Matt, there was 10 years in between when I wanted to be an entrepreneur and when I actually became one. And I think I had this block of like, well, I don't have the perfect idea, I don't have the perfect structure, I don't have the perfect anything, and so I can't start it. And I think if I could go back to 29-year-old me, I would say just try something, put yourself out there, figure out what it is, and then be okay with changing, and be okay with whatever you're gonna start could be totally different than what it is 6 months from now, 2 months from now, a year from now. But like, don't do what I did and like not start. I think the biggest courageous thing that you can do is put yourself out there and start it, and then learn from your mistakes and embrace your mistakes.
So, hi, my name is Darcella. So thank you very much for sharing that story about your grief and your process, because I had my daughter hit by a car wants, and it is amazing. The feeling. So I thank you. I appreciate that. I felt you over there on the side of the room. My question for you is, all entrepreneurs say, I want to start my own business because I want to fill in the blank, stay more times with my kids, blah, blah, blah. So did you ever get to do your why? Did you ever get to do your more time with your kids or give back to the community or whatever it was that you wanted to do?
It's a really good question. Thank you. I think, so I married a musician, and one thing, the reason why I went back to business school is actually that I wasn't passionate about what I did as a reporter. And my dad was in the insurance business, and no knocking on the insurance business, but it was not his favorite career, and he did not like it. And he told me once, he's like, Kasey, at the end of my time in the insurance business, I was spending 15 to 20 minutes in the shower every day getting ready for work. He's like, I was shampooing my hair. He's like, I'm bald. Like, there's nothing to shampoo. And so he's like, I was basically stalling because I didn't want to go into work. And he's like, if you ever feel like that, it's not right. And so find something that you're passionate about and that you want to do. So when I was a reporter, I had to be up at 2 a.m. to go in, full hair, full makeup, and go report the news. And I remember those moments, like sitting on the edge of the bathtub being like, you can do it. You have 15 sick days and you've used 5. And so I feel like you can't call in sick again. And knowing that that was that moment for me that, I can't do this. And I looked at my husband and the way he was so passionate about playing music and he had found his thing. And so I went back to business school, like looking for my passion. And I didn't find it right away. I took these jobs, like I was in the venture space for a while. I was doing this M&A role, and they were okay, like they paid well, but I was like, okay, well maybe I just don't have passion. Maybe it's just not what I'm gonna do. And so I think in the back of my head, I've always been searching for that passion and that thing that like gets me out of bed in the way that I'm excited. And so that was, when I started this, like this problem solving, I mean, it's super nerdy, but I love it. Like I love doing it. I love sitting around a whiteboard. I love showing like how we can do this work, and it gets me super jazzed, and like being around these smart people who make me, they blow my mind. That I'm passionate about. And so I think for me, finding that passion has been huge. And now that passion is a gift that can unlock other things. So we talk about this idea of like wanting to build St. Louis. We talk about like all these people that we've hired are in the funnel for St. Louis. They just don't know it yet. They may be top of the funnel, but like we're gonna get them all to St. Louis and get them working for us and with us. And so that's a bigger why for me, is like, how can we rebuild St. Louis through a company, through bringing jobs here, bringing talent here. Or employing great talent here. And so I think the first why was finding my passion, and it took me a long time to do it. And the second why was like, what does that unlock for you?
All right, sorry, one last question.
Oh, I get the last question. Okay.
Well, we could do, I think this gentleman will do 2 more.
Okay. Got it. Sorry.
No worries. So I heard you say that one of the things you do is you tap into your conscious energy.
Yeah.
And I'm very tapped into that part of our being, nature. So I want to know, who are you referencing? Who are you reading? Who's influencing that part of your being?
Yeah, thank you. I'm not very good at it yet, but I've started. And I think the flip side of like shoving all your emotions down is that it like puts kind of a block around that. And so therapy is great. If you don't do it, I'm a huge fan. But I think secondly, so the book that I read that really spoke to me was 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. And that's the framework that works for me, that helped me kind of understand like the above the line, below the line behavior. So above the line, when you're like in a state of curiosity or joy or enthusiasm, like what does that look like for you? And when you're below the line, when you're coming from a place of fear or anxiety or scarcity, what does that look like for you? And what it looked like for me was that like when I was scared, I was bitchy. Like I would snap at people, I would bite people's head off, and so now I look at that and I, like if I'm feeling scared, or if I'm worried about something, like I say that, like I'm scared about this deal, and right now I want to snap at you because you asked me this totally benign question, not you, but someone. You asked me this totally benign question, but I'm scared right now, and so I'm telling you that. And I feel like there is strength in being vulnerable, and it doesn't work in every organization, but we've built a culture where there is strength in vulnerability and being candid. And so I think that has been a really good framework, that book. I did, candidly, I think some of the energy work I was a little skeptical about initially, but I can't ignore this. Like, I feel it, and when I feel that, like, it's right. And so whether you think it's crazy, whether you think it's like, whoo, like, I don't know, it works for me. And so listening to that, like, I think there's some work around, chakras and healing energy that I've started looking into, and I think it speaks to me, but you have to kind of go on your own journey. The one that I really liked was the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hi, Yannick Jones.
Hi.
How are you? Thank you for sharing your story. Really cool stuff. I recently moved here from Miami, Florida, to open up a school with my cousin in North County. And we are a preschool, a Montessori preschool, and we're serving a pretty large population of young people.
That's awesome.
I don't know much about Ox Insights. I'm definitely going to look it up and learn more. But from the work you're currently doing, how are you giving back to the community? How are you exposing what you're doing to people who might not have the resource base or the knowledge base to get there? Because we're dealing with a community that is very low in economics. Mm-hmm. And so some of the things that you might be talking about, they just have no clue that it even exists.
Yeah.
And so part of my goal or my why at this moment is to bridge the gap of what people don't know.
Yeah.
I also have an MBA. I studied in Italy and all these beautiful things, but it brought me here to St. Louis to work with people who didn't have that same experience. So a lot of the things that I'm doing every day, I feel like I'm teaching,
Yeah.
literal, grown people, the young kids, the community around me, but what is Ox doing to do something similar in that format?
Yeah, thank you for that. It's so one of the people that I actually met when I was trying to figure out who I wanted to be or what I wanted to be when I grew up, I emailed Maxine Clark, who started Build-A-Bear out of the blue, and she took a coffee with me and she helped kind of mentor me and develop me, and that's something that she's been really good at in her career, is figuring out how to give back and so when I met with her and I told her about Ox and what we were doing, she's like, that's great, but how are you going to give back? How are you going to give back to the community and to nonprofits and to people who can't afford private equity money? And it's stuck with me, and I think it's something that as an entrepreneur, I have to the answer is, like, you have to prioritize what you value. And so if you say that you value something, then you actually have to put plans and priorities behind it. You can't just say, like, oh yeah, we're going to give back and we're going to do programming, and that doesn't actually make it happen. And so if I'm honest with you right now, like, this stage of building my business has kind of felt like a little bit of treading water in the deep end. Like, I'm kind of like not quite drowning, but it's tiring. And so I feel like I've been more focused on, like, just getting to the corner of the deep end and, like, grabbing a breath. But one of my priorities is figuring out, like, I'm very passionate about St. Louis and St. Louis City in particular. And I want to grow and build our business and our family here. And I think in order to do that, like, we have an opportunity to make St. Louis kind of a powerhouse for this work and some of the lessons that we're teaching some of the biggest companies in the world. And so one of the things that I want to do is figure out how we can give back, whether it's coming in and doing, like, workshops with people, whether it's doing, like, on the side consulting. Like, I would encourage you to email me after, and we can kind of go back and forth on things that I would tell you on how to grow your business and connect with your community. I don't have a perfect process yet, but it is a priority, And so I need to put a plan in place to like make that priority a reality.
Awesome. So this concludes our first session this morning. Thanks so much for coming out and spending time with us. The next session, Building Brand Awareness on a Budget, will begin shortly. Until then, there's a light breakfast outside.